Hello friends, Adam here with FED. So we have been playing through Fire Emblem, New Mystery of the Emblem on the channel, and we're playing on the hardest difficulty, and it's my first playthrough of the game ever. And it's got me thinking, what makes for a good hard mode in Fire Emblem? What kind of challenge does it need to present to the player to make it interesting? So I thought we would go through, talk about the various hardest difficulties throughout the series and the games that actually have different difficulties and stuff, and talk about what they do to make the game harder and whether or not it's a good thing, and then maybe we'll come to a conclusion at the end as to what really makes for a good hard mode in Fire Emblem. So the first example of a hard mode that we can find in the series is in FE4 with Clever Mode, which is a weird AI thing. I don't feel like anyone really understands how this works. People kind of do. My understanding is that the enemies act smarter when their commander is alive, like when you play on normal mode, and in Clever Mode it makes it so the enemies always act like their commander is alive. Now I don't know what all this entails. Maybe they're better at ganging up on your units or something like that, but apparently it makes the game harder. I haven't noticed a huge difference, or really any difference at all, but it's there apparently. So it's hard for me to even call this a hard mode. Clever Mode just seems like it doesn't feel like it changes much, so I'm not even gonna really spend much time on it. I kind of want to mention FE5 because there is a Paragon mode, and that's would be the easy mode. Then the base game is kind of the hard mode, I guess, but it kind of doesn't count. Really, all Paragon mode is just gives you double the experience, and that would be considered easy mode because your units are growing really fast. But even then, it doesn't make the game that much easier by the time you get to end game. It really just makes the early mid game to late mid game a lot easier. It just makes mid game a lot easier essentially, because your units are going to be way ahead. By the time you get to end game, enemies have caught up and stuff. So I thought I might as well just mention that. FE5 I think has a pretty fun difficulty curve throughout it on normal mode, so that's a thought. Getting into FE6, 7, 8, and 9. So Binding Blade, Blazing Sword, Sacred Stones, Path of Radiance. I think they all do pretty similar things with their hardest difficulty. Aside from FE9's, which Path of Radiance is Maniac mode, which is a Japan exclusive, it's honestly just not very fun. It's just a huge enemy spam, and all the enemies have tons of HP and just a lot of bulk, hard to kill. Not necessarily super threatening to a lot of your units, because a lot of the units in Path of Radiance are pretty stacked, but they are just take forever. It just takes a long time. As for FE6, 7, and 8, I feel like it's just kind of stronger enemies, more of them, and maybe better placements. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't really remember a whole lot of differences other than that. FE6 in particular, hit rates are kind of rough, especially early game, with your axes and your lances and stuff. So I think that is something to consider as well. That hard mode really accentuates that problem. But other than that, they all feel pretty similar outside of being just there's the stat benchmarks for doubling and one rounding are a little higher, is kind of what it feels like to me. But those three games, the GBA games, are probably the games in the series I have the least experience with. So I'd be really interested to, aside from FE12 because it's my first playthrough, but I'd be interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this one, how the hard mode is handled in the GBA games. And then we move on to FE10, which honestly, Radiant Dawn's hard mode is just kind of dumb. Yes, the enemies are way tougher. Yeah, there's more enemies in some cases, but it does just some dumb things to make it more to fake a difficulty spike. Those dumb things are getting rid of the weapon triangle, which the weapon triangle largely favors the player. They have the most control over it, and it really is there to just help the player have better hit rates and in some cases deal more damage. And so it gets rid of the weapon triangle, which definitely benefits the enemy. And also, you aren't able to check enemy movement range. You can look at the enemy, look at their stats and see how high their move stat is, and then you can count spaces, but you can't just click on them and see how far they can move. We've been able to do that since way back. We've been able to look at enemy ranges forever now. Not even super well plotted enemy range, just click on the enemy and their movement range pops up. But in Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn easy and normal mode, you can just click on them and it just stays there, and we've had that ever since. So I don't know why they thought that was a good idea to get rid of that. it really just makes it more tedious because you have to sit there and count enemy movement range, which is really a shame because I do really like FE10 hard mode aside from those two things. Even the weapon triangle, I don't even miss it that much because I think it does a good job of emphasizing biorhythm, which I think people really discount how good biorhythm is. I think it's really fun strategically in the beginning of the game, the first part, really. Once you get past part 1, your units are all so good that it doesn't matter. But the Dawn Brigade, you really need to focus on your biorhythm, and I think that's part of the design of the game. And people hate biorhythm just because it's something, maybe it's something more they have to think about. I don't know why people dislike it. Maybe they feel it's too random, but I don't think it's that random. It's pretty plannable. I think it's cool. Anyways, but getting rid of the movement range, enemy movement range is just silly. And it's artificial. That's what I call like artificial difficulty. It doesn't really make the game harder, it just makes it more tedious. It makes it so you have to count more and remember things rather than just having it on the screen for you, and that's a pain. So I hate that. Other than that, FE10 probably one of my favorite hard modes. All right, Shadow Dragon has a great range of difficulties. There's normal mode, and then there's like 5 hard modes, and there's something for everybody, something for every player. And the hard modes really, it's just like either like the enemies just get incredibly powerful later on. I think this is probably the best job of like enemy scaling on difficulty is in the DS games. But the hardest difficulties get a little ridiculous. You know, you have enemies with silver weapons in like chapter 1. You know, you have silver axes and silver lances and stuff running around that you have to deal with, which is just insane. They also have like maxed out weapon ranks, so if they have the advantage in the weapon triangle, they're dealing like, if it's a sword unit with advantage of the weapon triangle, they're dealing like 3 extra damage, which is just ridiculous. It's something you have to really worry about and plan around. That's it. I like it, but it's also, I can see why people don't. It just feels like a big ball of stats running around, and that can be annoying. But I think, honestly, the DS games have the greatest variety of difficulties, and they do the best job of scaling the enemies. And New Mystery, I really like Lunatic Reverse. That's my only experience with the game, I'll be honest. My only experience with the game is Lunatic Reverse, and I am really enjoying it. So I'm not done yet, so I can't really state for a fact that it's my favorite difficulty so far. But at this point, it's doing a really good job of contending for it. So I'm having a lot of fun. It makes me think. I don't think it's kind of restrictive in that, like, yeah, you're gonna, like, if you want to do really well, yeah, you need to, you know, use the avatar extensively. You're gonna want to use Pala, your Catrias, you know, these units that come really good and stay really good throughout the entire game. I think it still has a lot of room for like messing around and using units that you want to use. I haven't done a great job of that, but I don't know, like, I put some good work into like Sita, even though I know she's a flyer, she's already good. But I don't know, I put some good work into Sita. I like her. And like, you totally could use like Linde, however you say her name, really effectively. I think people consider her one of like top at least top 20, maybe top 15 units or top 10 units in the game. But yeah, anyways, there's a great range of difficulty, and doesn't feel so tight that I can't meme around a little bit with your units, you know. But yeah, and also just flipping on its head and giving you just a total different gameplay aspect of having the enemy always attacking first. They always have Vantage. It's Vantage Plus from Awakening. It's insane. Really, really fun. And I think it's just really well balanced and well made. So I like it. Now, Awakening had Lunatic Plus as its hardest difficulty, and it is just dumb. Incredibly powerful enemies, and they all have and a lot of them have stupid skills like Vantage Plus, which they always attack first, which, like, you know, you can work around that. You do that in FE12, it's fine. But then there's also Luna Plus, which means every one of their attacks has the Luna effect. There are enemies that have like Pavice Plus, meaning every time they get attacked, Pavice activates, stuff like that. And it's just dumb. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but my small amount of experience with it just isn't fun. So, I don't know. If you like Lunatic Plus, let me know in the comments why. And then you might need to seek some help, because that's just like masochism at its finest. But yeah, FE13's Lunatic Plus is ridiculous. I'm not a fan. Fates, you know, with the 3 different routes, I think they all handle Lunatic mode differently, the hardest difficulties. I think Conquest is really like, it's really well thought out skills on enemies, and then just better enemy placement. I mean, that could be totally wrong. This is what I remember in my head. And then also higher stats, of course, but I think it's a really well thought out difficulty. Birthright, sort of just kind of becomes enemy spam. Again, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I'm no expert on all this. This is just my personal experience. But the enemy spam in bulk is just really high. And then Revelation is, it's kind of, I don't have a ton of experience with Revelation on Lunatic. I've played through it once, but I've played through Conquest plenty of times and stuff. But Rev, I've played through Lunatic once and had fun, but it didn't feel that difficult, to be honest. Kind of like Birthright didn't feel that difficult. So I don't know. Tell me in the comments. Again, this is another one that I'm iffy on. What does the different routes and fates do well with their hard mode? Then we have Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. The hard mode really is just tedious. The enemies all just have really inflated bulk, so really high HP, and it's hard to get to a point where you're one-rounding. And it's just not fun in that way. They also hit, obviously they also hit a little harder. They'll have better weapons. Like a lot of times you'll see in normal mode on Echoes, you'll see a lot of enemies just running around with the base weapon, the one that's automatically equipped with the class. But on hard mode, you'll see a lot more of your iron bows, steel bows, steel lances and stuff just running around on random enemies rather than being on bosses. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's an interesting change. But the fact that the damage sponges thing, it's just, they take forever to take down, and that's kind of annoying. Where in most tactical RPGs, most strategy RPGs, one-rounding, I feel like isn't the norm. But in Fire Emblem, you come to expect one-rounding. You come to expect that being like the benchmark of a good unit, a combat unit at least. It's like, oh, you can one-round? Then you must be okay. But in Echoes, one-rounding really isn't a thing on hard mode until unless you grind, or maybe just late game with some really good skills like Hunter's Volley and Double Lion. Double Lion, is that what it's called? Lion Barrage? Double Lion? What's it called? I don't know. One of those things. And finally, we have Maddening mode for 3 houses. It is just enemies with... honestly, it's kind of a well thought out mode in that I like that the enemies have skills that make sense. So like every archer has Vantage kind of thing. Is it Vantage? Yeah. No, every archer has Poison Strike. Sorry. Every sniper has Vantage and Poison Strike, and it becomes like a standard. Like if you see an enemy, you know what skills they have. And I like that. The less you have to check skills, the better. That's a problem that I have with like the GBA games, is like checking things is so tedious and annoying because there's multiple pages of stats and everything. But 3 houses is just one button click and you see everything you need to know, and I like that. Anyways, it really just becomes like really big balls of stats, and enemy classes really fill in the archetype that they are meant to. For instance, you have your sword masters that are just stupid fast. Same for assassins. Or you have like the brawlers that are extremely fast but kind of fragile but also hard to hit. I think that's really interesting that they made the classes really hone in on what they're supposed to be good at as a like an archetypical class. Like, and even it does work with the skills too. You think about Archer, they have Poison Strike, which archers are not necessarily meant to kill enemies in like a archetypical fashion. They're meant to chip down from a distance, and Poison Strike adds to that, and I like that in it. But on top of that, that makes maddening kind of frustrating is there's a lot of enemy there's like reinforcement spam, same turn reinforcements. Some enemy types are just kind of incredibly overpowered, like Pegasus Knights and Falcon Knights. For whatever reason, they're just insanely good and really hard to deal with. High movement plus Canto, and then they also just have incredible stats, and they always have like incredible weaponry. So those are hard to deal with and annoying to deal with. but like you have ways around it, and maddening really forces you to use all of your resources, and I think that's a good thing. Like it forces you to use your best gambits and your best weapons and your best combat arts to be successful, and I think that's a good thing when a difficulty makes you use all your resources. And I think that's something that New Mystery of the Emblem does a really good job of on the harder difficulties. You know, and it gives you plenty of tools. You know, you can buy stat boosters on after I think it's after you beat Lunatic, or it's after you beat Hard 2, whatever it is. Once you beat a certain difficulty, you are able to buy stat boosters from the base armory or just the prep screen, and you're also given the Rainbow Potion, and those both make it so those alone give you so many tools to work with, and then on top of that you have stuff like forging, reclassing, all these different things that make the game so interesting. And Lunatic and Lunatic Reverse expect you to use those things, and I think that's good. It should expect you to use all your resources in the most effective way possible to have an easier time, and that is what and the more I think about it, that's what makes a good hard mode. Does it make me use my resources? Does it make me think and really plan out what I'm doing? Otherwise, it's just kind of boring. It's just boring Fire Emblem stuff at that point. But yeah, so I think the best difficulties in the series are, like, the best hardest modes in the series are probably Lunatic Reverse. I think it's probably my favorite at this point, but we'll see once I'm finished with it. Unpopular opinion, but I think Maddening is actually fairly okay. I think Maddening is less bad than people give it credit for. I think it's actually, I'm not going to say it's balanced or whatever, because I actually don't even know what that, when you say something's balanced, I think when people say it's balanced, I just mean it's good. But Maddening is, I think, better than people give it credit for. I think it does a really good job of forcing the player to use their resources, including Divine Pulse. I think Three Houses was designed in a way to force the player to use Divine Pulse as a resource rather than as a backup plan. And again, not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's kind of fun and cool. Those two are the most impressive to me off the bat. If Radiant Dawn didn't make it so you couldn't see enemy ranges, that would be up there too, but that's just such a silly, arbitrary difficulty thing that makes no sense. I can't justify putting it, you know, I can't justify putting it in like a top 3 kind of situation, because that's just so silly. But anyways, let me know in the comments, what do you think makes for a good hard mode? Again, I think it is really just comes down to, does it force me to think, or maybe think, strategize, think outside the box, and use use the resources I'm given. Those are my thoughts. But what do you think? What makes a good hard mode in Fire Emblem? What do you hope to see in the future for hard modes? Do you think things like casual mode really take away from that, make it kind of pointless kind of thing? All those things I'm curious about. Please let me know in the comments. And like the video if you haven't. I'd appreciate that. And please subscribe to the channel. And I'll catch you next time, friends.